Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session of the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing of March 1st, 2022. We are beginning the afternoon session with public hearing item number 3. This meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube. So there are multiple ways you can participate. If you would like to speak on any items, please join the Zoom meeting at the estimated time shown on our public hearing agenda, which can be found on our website. And if you'd like to watch the proceedings, you may do so at our YouTube channel. And I will now turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala, to take us through the afternoon agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. And starting with public hearing item number 3, this is LPC 22-06782, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 2134, lot 8, 613 West 155th Street in the Audubon Terrace Historic District. This is a neo-Renaissance style institutional building designed by Charles P. Huntington and built in 1904. And the application is to install barrier-free access lifts and ramps, rooftop mechanical equipment and bulkheads, and signage.
Hey, Commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Kate, you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. And then you can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Sure, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. It's telling me that I cannot, oh, there we go. I'm not sharing my screen yet.
No, you don't share your screen.
Oh, okay.
Just click on it. And I'll just note for the record before we begin this presentation that Vice Chair Bland is recused on this item and is not present for this presentation.
So my name is Kate Regev. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Buyer Blinder Bell. And then Margaret Connors McQuaid from the Hispanic Society will also be joining me. Margaret will actually be speaking first. So I will hand it over to her and then pick up when she's ready.
Terrific. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Connors McQuaid, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Hispanic Society of America, and I'm really delighted to be with all of you here today, albeit virtually. I'm joined today, as Kate mentioned, by members of our design team, Kate Regev and Richard Southwick from Buyer Blinder Bell. In addition to BBB, our team includes Seldorf Architects. And we're really pleased to present today our next phase of the work on our landmark buildings. I'm grateful to many of those of you who came yesterday to visit us in person. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Hispanic Society, I thought take a moment to say a few words about the history of the Hispanic Society and our objectives with the project. If you could go to the next slide, that would be great. The Hispanic Society was founded in 1904 by Archer Milton Huntington, whose father was one of the great railroad giants of the 19th century. From a young age, Archer committed himself to building a museum and library dedicated to the art and culture of the Hispanic world. And today the collection is considered unrivaled in the world, covering from ancient Iberia to the early 20th century, as well as works from Latin America, the Caribbean, the Philippines, and Goa and India. Huntington purchased the square block at Broadway between 155th Street and 156th Street, today known as Audubon Terrace, and began construction with the main building located at the center of the southern side of the terrace, which I'm showing you here. And if you can go to the next slide, I'm showing you here Huntington standing on the left on a painting, a portrait of him by the artist Lopez Mesquita, and images of the interior of the building along actually, if you go to the next one, those are interiors of the museum as well as the reading room building. So there's some other slides of the interior and exterior. This is the one facing north of what we call the North Building, with a sculpture of the Cid by Anna Hyatt Huntington, who was married to Archer Huntington in 1923, around the time this North Building was actually erected, and which closed off the terrace. And if you can go to the next slide. Huntington expanded the facilities of the Hispanic Society as he simultaneously was expanding the collection. He also lured other institutions to build uptown, forming a campus of cultural organizations that would be known together as Audubon Terrace. Both Audubon Terrace and Audubon Park, shown here, are designated as historic districts. This plan we're showing you here identifies the other cultural institutions that originally formed part of Audubon Terrace, and the dotted line outlines the Hispanic Society's campus, which consists of 3 distinct buildings: the North Building on the north end on 155th Street, the main building, which is on the south side on 155th Street, and the East Building, which is right on the corner of 155th Street and Broadway. And that was originally the Museum of the American Indian and was acquired by the Hispanic Society in 1996. And the main building is flanked by 2 wings on either side that were added in 1915 and 1920, respectively. And if you can go to the next slide, this is a great photo from 1919, before the library building and the North Building were built. And you'll notice the number of stairs that one has to navigate in order to enter into the main building. You enter by going down a flight of steps and climbing up again another flight, only to find yet another flight of steps to enter into the building. So I just wanted to give you that brief introduction of the Hispanic Society, and I'm going to now turn it over to Kate Regev. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. And so just one other quick item to note about this historic photo is that the result of all of these different kind of expansions and institutions that were moved to Audubon Terrace is this kind of grand Beaux-Arts planned campus with the main entry on Broadway, which will be relevant in some of the upcoming topics that I'm going to discuss. So today, though, I'm going to really mainly be speaking about a few select areas of the Hispanic Society's campus. What's outlined here in red in the dashed red line, that's the entirety of the Hispanic Society's campus. Today, we're going to be focusing on looking at the East Building, the main building, and then the Broadway and upper terraces. In 2019, the Hispanic Society engaged Beyer, Blinder, Bell, and Seldorf architects to execute a master plan. And as a result of that master plan, we developed a series of major goals for the years moving forward. And among those goals were to improve accessibility on the campus. Margaret just touched on all of the different level changes and stairs that are required to make your way through the campus. We also want to increase exhibition space. The museum has a really strong collection that does not have the space to be properly exhibited. We want to provide a conservation studio, activate the terraces themselves, improve staff and back of house facilities, provide universal access, modernize the mechanical and life safety systems, and then, of course, safeguard the Hispanic Society Museum and Library as a unique cultural institution. And so as part of this, we developed kind of 2 different parts, what I would say, to the master plan. There's a part that deals mainly with the terraces and accessing them, which you can see here, which would be as you approach from Broadway, you would have some steps to come down to what we call the lower or Broadway terrace, but also kind of 2 L-shaped ramps that would take you down. Then to get from this lower terrace to this upper portion of the terrace, there would be a vertical lift and then also a ramp coming down to this additional lower terrace in front of the North Building. And so you can see that really we're trying to negotiate a number of different grade changes here. So this was part of the master plan, one aspect. And then another aspect of the master plan was to work the interior spaces. So what I showed you before was really thinking about the campus and its exterior. At the interior, unfortunately, at the moment, there is a single elevator for the entire campus, and it is a passenger elevator located in the East Building. So we want to improve both vertical access within the buildings, but also really make a connection across the buildings, an internal connection. What you see at the top here is an existing section, which shows the different elevations of different floors within each of the buildings. And as Margaret had noted, the buildings were built sequentially over a series of about 20 years. So there's not an alignment across the buildings and even the different wings where a floor hits its neighbor. So we, as part of the master plan, we want to kind of stitch the buildings together a little bit more accessibly and make it so that there's an internal connection that really guides how you would move across the campus once you're able to arrive down those ramps from Broadway. So I just want to review a little bit of what steps we've taken so far, what we're proposing now, and what we anticipate doing in the future. Over the past year, we executed a number of small projects we would call early action. That includes a ramp from Broadway down to the Broadway Terrace, and then another short ramp from Broadway Terrace into the East Building. In the East Building, we opened a pop-up gallery, what we call this ground floor exhibition space. And then there also was an exhibition on the terrace itself. What we'll be looking at today will be what we're calling phase 1A. And that means to make an accessible path, not just from Broadway down to the terrace, to the Broadway Terrace, but to continue that path into a wing of the main building, which is highlighted in pink here. So there's going to be an accessible path from Broadway all the way to the main building and the adjacent Soraya Gallery. We're also proposing a conservation studio, which would be located in the East Building on the 4th floor, highlighted in red here. As part of both of those projects, there are mechanical upgrades. And then as part of the conservation studio, we're also proposing a new ADA compliant elevator. And then finally, giving the campus an improved street presence with signage. In the future, I won't go into all of these. There's a long list of future improvements, but they include both programmatic updates, as well as some of those connections that I talked about earlier, vertical connections with another elevator proposed for the main building, and then that horizontal connection that I talked about so that you would be able to ultimately enter into the Broadway Terrace from Broadway, maintaining that kind of processional entrance into the campus, move into the East Building, and then move horizontally over to through the kind of the wings of the main building, and then ultimately to the Soraya Gallery. Along with all of those items are kind of updated infrastructure, reopening some blocked windows, and a number of other items that are listed here. So first, I'm going to talk about accessibility issues, which we've touched on briefly already. As you can see here in section, you approach Broadway, and immediately from Broadway, in order to enter the campus, you come down a flight of stairs. Then in order to get up to the main building, you will go up another flight of stairs. And then in order to approach the main building, there's yet another flight of stairs. The current means of accessing the campus right now are on multiple levels, and that's in part because of the grade changes that happen at the terraces, but also because of the grade change that happens along 155th Street. So there are 2 service entrances along the south here along 155th Street, but those take you into, one takes you into an egress stair, a landing actually at an egress stair, and another takes you to a non-ADA compliant stair. I think more significantly, we really wanted to work with the existing means of entry into the campus, this really kind of symmetrical Beaux-Arts procession into the campus that really is kind of still in keeping with the spirit of ADA, to make that entrance compliant rather than some of these kind of side entrances. So this is, just to hop back here, this is the existing first floor plan where, as you can see, you're able to access the East Building through a number of entries, which are more or less at grade. However, there's no entry into the main building or its wings on either side because of the grade change that happens at the terrace and also along 155th Street. So the main entrance, this is the second floor plan, into the main building is through up a flight of stairs. And you can see kind of in the center there that is how you enter the main building right now. A couple of photos to existing conditions photos, so we understand how you move through the space. So the first photo on the top left is if you are standing on Broadway on the sidewalk looking into the campus, and there's an existing metal ramp with a temporary permit coming down from Broadway, navigating that grade change down into the Broadway Terrace. And then on the top right is a ramp that navigates that grade change from the terrace itself into the east building. Then on the bottom left, we have an image as if you were standing in the middle of Broadway Terrace looking west, as if you were going to go up into the main building. So yet another flight of stairs. And then finally, that photo on the bottom right is as if you were standing at the top of those stairs and looking towards the main building. And so this is looking at those 4 different images in plan. You can see the ramp coming down off of Broadway, then the short ramp that takes you from Broadway Terrace into the east building. Then what we are proposing is an incline platform lift that would take you up that staircase from Broadway to Upper Terrace. And then finally, an extended platform lift and vertical lift that would take you from the Upper Terrace into the main building. So a closer look in section at what we're proposing. There's already some existing ramps that are noted here on the left. What we're proposing is to navigate that change between the Broadway Terrace and the Upper Terrace, and then again into the main building. And what we're looking at here are what we think of as kind of long-term temporary. So as you saw in the master plan, ultimately we have different locations where we would like to, and kind of more formal kind of non-temporary ramps and lifts. What we're proposing here, we likely anticipate to be in place for about 5 to 10 years, knowing that we need to basically, we need to get people into the main building, but that we don't have the funds right now in order to execute the master plan. So I think we like to think of this as, yes, as I said, temporary, long-term. And so to look at this first lift that we are proposing, we're anticipating placing an incline platform lift that would run along this staircase. You can see the existing conditions here. It's a limestone stair with granite steps. And then there's also at the top a fence that was installed sometime in the 1950s. So we have a non-original wrought iron fence. And so what we're proposing is to locate an incline platform lift along the south side of the stairs with posts every other step, and with a call button at the bottom landing and another one at the top. The incline platform lift would be located in the closed position around the corner of that kind of newel post at the bottom. And then in order to get into and up to the terrace, we're proposing to modify an existing panel of the fence. The 2 center panels of the fence are operable and swing open. The 2 that flank it on either side that have kind of that signage posting are fixed, but we're proposing to modify it so that it can swing open manually and be open at the same time as when someone would come and open the other gates. So this is kind of showing, you know, both the position of the gates in the open position on the previous slide, and here with the closed position on the previous slide, and here on the in the open position. And so this is just kind of a photo montage of what we anticipate this would look like in the open position. You'll see on the lift would remain in its resting spot would be kind of at the lower level landing, and that in fact actually the platform itself folds up in an up position, so it would not be obstructing the area of the paving at the bottom of the lift. We have some details about how we would be anchoring into the granite stone, the granite steps themselves, as a means for supporting the lift. And then also how we would be modifying the non-original panel of the fence at the top so that it can become a swinging panel that also would be able to accommodate the rails for the lift. And we like this proposal because it is easy to remove the lift in a few years down the line once we're ready to execute the master plan work. Then we're proposing also a second lift in order to get up into the main building. And so these are some existing conditions views as if you were standing on the left, kind of near the gates, the top of the gates at the upper terrace. And then the right image is as if you were standing looking east back towards those gates that we had just looked at, and then the main building is on the right. In order to get up into the main building, there's a flight of steps. There's a short landing in front of the doors, and then yet another step in order to get finally into the building. So because I think also I should mention that there are some non-original handrails that flank the stairs coming into the building, which we're proposing to remove. And then what we're proposing to do is to build out a platform at the level that you enter into the building, and then have a flight of steps coming up from the east, and then a vertical lift coming up, getting you up to the level of the platform on the west. The reason why we need the platform is because the existing landing at the steps at the door is both not at the level of the entry to the building, and also the landing itself is very short and doesn't allow turning radius for someone to arrive via a lift. In terms of materials, we are proposing that this be kind of a lightweight structure. It would be a steel and aluminum structure with painted aluminum panels, and then the vertical platform that I had mentioned. I think the idea too is that we would try and bear as lightly as possible on the existing granite steps. We would be anchoring into them, but also the idea here is that it's kind of this long-term temporary, that once we're able to execute the master plan and the accessibility that it provides, we would remove this, and the existing steps would remain. And this is just kind of a slide that explains a little bit more clearly what each of those lifts look like. On the left, we have the inclined platform lift in its open position, and along with a color swatch. We propose that it be painted black powder-coated aluminum so that it matches the existing gates. And then the one on the right, the vertical lift, would be a dark powder-coated aluminum that would kind of go along with the bronze windows on the building and the bronze doors. So I'm also going to talk about the roofscape on the east building. The accessibility that I mentioned was really to get us up into the main building. Now we're shifting towards the east building, which, as Margaret mentioned previously, was originally the Museum of the American Indian. Currently, the building, as you can see, has an existing elevator bulkhead, which services an existing passenger elevator, which is original to the building, circa around 1920, and it's very small. It's about 3 feet by 3 feet. And you can see on the right that existing elevator bulkhead. These are the existing conditions. This is the view on top, as if you were standing on the roof of the building to the north, looking south. And then there's also some views on the bottom of the flat roof showing some of the existing equipment. You'll note that there is a fan penthouse, as you see in the bottom right, which is highly visible. But otherwise there's not, and then there's a little bit of other mechanical equipment, but for the most part, this flat roof does not have a lot of equipment on it because the building has not been heavily used. It's primarily used as storage with some gallery functions, but a lot of this equipment is decades old. And so what we're proposing to do, as I mentioned earlier, part of this phase is to add a conservation studio to the 4th floor here. And in order to service that conservation studio, we're proposing to put new mechanical equipment on this flat roof. So we are looking at what you see in red would be mechanical equipment that would primarily service the 4th floor, with some elements also servicing the floors below. What you see in orange is and the additional bulkhead for the elevator and some other services that I mentioned we will be adding. And so again, you see here in red at the top, this is the existing section with that fan very highly visible from the public way. And on the bottom image, you see the proposed section in which we really have tried to keep the equipment as low to the roof as possible. And any higher or taller elements we tried to place them kind of in the middle of the roof so that they are not as visible from the street. And so these are some aerial views so that just so we have a little bit clearer understanding. So this is the existing mechanical equipment. And then what we're proposing is new mechanical equipment in red, and then in orange is the rooftop bulkhead, and the highest portion is for the new service elevator, which would provide both ADA access up through the entire building, as well as the ability to transport art throughout the building, especially to the 4th floor or to the conservation studio. In terms of some of the detailing of that elevator bulkhead, we're proposing to match very closely the existing elevator bulkhead. You see in the historic photo on the left that it looks to us as though the color of the bulkhead was originally a lighter color, something similar to the limestone facades, as opposed to the darker color of the copper roof. And so we would like to bring back that condition. What's currently there is kind of a green paint or coating that has been applied to the entire roof, all of its bulkheads and walls, as well as the elevator bulkhead that I think was intended to kind of match the patinaed copper roofing. So we would like to change that condition. And as you see in the elevation at the bottom, that we're proposing to have the new elevator bulkhead be painted stucco with a new copper cornice that would match in profile and in height the existing elevator bulkhead. So we've done a number of sightline studies, and this is just a plan that will show you the journey that I'm going to take you as we walk around the building, starting at number 1, which, as you can see in the top left, is as if you were standing at the corner of Broadway and 156th Street. You can see here, the next couple of slides will have the existing condition on the left. In the middle, you will have a mock-up condition of an existing mock-up that we did on the roof of the building. And then on the right will be a photo montage. And then the top right is where we've blown that up for clarity. So you can see here that the proposed mechanical equipment is visible from across the street at Broadway and 156th. And that as you approach the building, the mechanical equipment becomes less and less visible, but you are able to get a bit of a kind of a sliver of that new elevator bulkhead. Then as you stand, as if you were standing in front of the gates, about to enter the campus, neither the elevator bulkhead nor the mechanical equipment is visible. As you kind of move south, again, from this vantage point at the corner of 155th and Broadway on the east side, the equipment and the elevator bulkhead are not visible. As you move further south, however, you do start to be able to see a little bit of the proposed mechanical equipment. You can see that in the top right. And then as we kind of move west to the other side of the street, you are able to see a little bit of the mechanical equipment and then a bit of the elevator bulkhead as well. The further back you go, I should mention, the further south along this side, the less visible it is because you are blocked from view by both the elevation change and also by the fence, and then the grade change of the cemetery itself, which is kind of what you see on the left here in these photos. I'm just going to keep walking us kind of around the building. This is as you get closer to the building on the corner of 155th and Broadway. And you can see in the top right, it looks like instead what, well, you can see our mock-up there that's highlighted instead of our photo montage, but both the mechanical equipment, the tops of the mechanical equipment, and then the elevator bulkhead are slightly visible. Then this is as you move closer towards the building, then the elevator bulkhead is no longer visible, and the mechanical equipment is slightly visible. Then as we move down 155th Street, neither the bulkhead nor the equipment is visible. And then I just wanted to show a couple of views looking within the campus where the two items are really the most visible. When you're standing kind of in the far corner of one of the terraces, you see the elevator bulkhead most clearly, as well as a little bit of the mechanical equipment. As we move through the terrace, they both become a little bit more visible. And then when you are standing on the upper terrace looking down towards the east building, again, the elevator bulkhead is still visible. And then finally, I wanted to end on exterior signage that we're proposing. At the moment, there is very limited signage on the building. And in fact, the community and I think the broader kind of New York City community is not really aware of the Hispanic Society Museum and Library. And we would like to change that. And we would like to kind of really let the neighborhood and the community know about the building and the fact that it's open to the public and it's free. And so we're proposing kind of two different types of signage. Vertical banners that would be hung in between select columns along the exterior, and then also a fence mounted signage. So a little bit more about the fence mounted signage. We're looking at the logo of the Hispanic Society that would be attached by some brackets to the fence itself. The fence, I should note, was installed in 2006, so it's not a historic fence, and it is possible that down the line, the institutions on the terrace will want to remove this fence to kind of create a more open condition between the street and the institutions themselves. This is kind of the existing condition on the left and the proposed signage on the right. And then also some ideas about, we looked to Cooper Hewitt, for example, as a means of attaching to a fence in really kind of a minimally invasive way. Looking at the banners, we are proposing banners that would fit, as I mentioned, between columns along 3 facades of the east building. It would be through some kind of cable system that would be attached at the top and bottom into the limestone facades. They would be kind of cinched on a woven steel rope with the banners being fabric themselves. We're proposing 2 banners at this corner, so one on the south side and then one on the east side, which we think is helpful in terms of visibility for cars that pass by. And then 3 banners on the north facade that face into the terrace. So one banner that would be over the center of this east building at the entry to the building, and then one banner on either side flanking it with kind of one separation of bays. And then I also just wanted to end on a few precedents for these banners that we looked at other similar institutions like the Met, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and the Met Cloisters. I think that, for many of these institutions and for what the Hispanic Society is anticipating, some of these banners will likely change, not in location, but in terms of content to highlight upcoming or current exhibitions, while others would likely be more permanent in terms of content and would be kind of, showcasing the museum's presence. Okay, so I think that's all that we had to share. I have some appendix slides also for any questions that might be relevant.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, I don't see any questions at this time. Oh, wait, yes, Commissioner Shamir Barron, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just curious if you had considered, because there is so much additional HVAC and mechanical equipment on the roof, and despite the fact that it's not dramatically visible, if there had been a consideration of actually building a copper towards green roof not a roof because you can't enclose it, but some kind of a parapet so that it would continue, even though it was not there originally, the line of the kind of the green roof-like in the area of the current bulkhead and all of the mechanical equipment. If that had been a consideration, or if what you were trying to do was try to approximate the concrete painted and make it as not visible as possible.
Good question, thank you. So yes, we tried to make the equipment as non-visible as possible. And so we considered some kind of screening element, especially on this south side here that we're looking at. I think our issue there was that the existing roof is a flat roof, and the existing roof is not visible from the street. So to continue an element horizontally would kind of increase the visibility at that location. As you can see here in this photo, the green roof is visible on the kind of eastern portion of the east building, but there's no visible roof on this portion. And when we looked at doing a screening element there, what you ended up seeing was the screen really quite strongly, as opposed to kind of letting the mechanical equipment fade in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't referring to a screen. I was actually referring to kind of a faux roof, a parapet roof that looked like the roofs that are there.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think we wanted to try and keep the existing parapet condition kind of as true to its original condition as possible, knowing that, even historically there had been some mechanical equipment on this roof, which was highly visible, and we think that these elements are less so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
Question of the banners. The color of the banners, what do they stand for? It's orange.
Yes, thank you for that question. Let me see if I can hop there. So the colors are meant to be more diagrammatic than true to the actual graphics that are proposed there. This is not a reflection of the content or the colors that the Hispanic Society is proposing.
Okay, so the graphics on the fence is also not what you're proposing.
The graphic itself, but I think we are still determining I think we are flexible on the color of the signage, but the graphic itself of that is what we are proposing.
I think the color is fine. I just thought it meant something special, but perhaps not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Jefferson, did you have another question?
Oh, no, that's
okay.
it. But thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony, and we may have more questions after that. If you're in this meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sasha Seeley to take us through the testimony.
Alrighty, thank you. So Christina Conroy from Victorian Society, New York. You should be receiving a request from me. Okay, Christina, I see that you've accepted my request. Please turn on your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society of New York. Now, Audubon Terrace is an important and perhaps preeminent example of Beaux-Arts civic planning in New York City. It is important culturally, architecturally, and for its sculptural embellishments by Anna Huntington. The Victorian Society finds some of the significant interventions proposed to be appropriate and others severely flawed. The rooftop mechanical and bulkhead additions, while visible, don't appear to have significant effect on the roofscape and will not call attention to themselves, so we think this work should be found appropriate. It seems that the visual harm caused by the proposed chairlift to the central terrace in context of the stone and iron work at the terraces is within acceptable bounds. Some members of our committee agree that the proposed black finish is the best choice. Others think limestone or another neutral color would be better. This is important enough that we suggest a mock-up of railing sections in different finishes to determine which is least intrusive. The proposed metal platform, reoriented stair, and lift to the main entrance of the upper terrace are, we believe, extremely destructive to the building's architectural and aesthetic integrity. This is the main architectural entrance to the original building, and the flanking lions are sculptures by Anna Huntington. The proposed changes will provide equal access for persons with accessibility issues, and for those without. The architectural debasement will also equal for both groups. Reversibility is a laudable objective, but it isn't the same as or a substitute for appropriateness. A better way must be found. If this alteration is intended as an interim measure, as is possibly implied by the master plan drawings, then we believe there must be a firm timeline on the approval. Otherwise, given the vagaries of the funding, the change may become essentially permanent. Finally, regarding the sign program, the VSNY sympathizes with the institution's need to enlarge its presence and increase visitorship. This, we believe, has long been a problem for the institutions of Audubon Terrace. Some of our committee think this exuberant sign program is a reasonable response to this need, and that the vast complex can easily absorb and benefit from the proposed signage and banner program, which is practically necessitated by the complex's location on Broadway with its multiple traffic lanes and a median. Now, others feel that the signs are likely to have little effect bringing people to the site. This could be tested with a temporary sign. These members believe any possible small benefit is not worth the inappropriate visual impacts to this great classical complex. How did it become normal to cover up our classical institutional buildings with banners? These committee members find the proposed signs fight with and obscure the symmetry, materials, style, scale, color, and details of the complex, its building, and ornamental fence. Thank you from the Victorian Society.
Thank you. All right, Christabel Goff, you should be receiving a request from me to rejoin as a panelist so that you're able to speak. All right, Christabel Goff from the Society for the Architecture of the City. Please just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak. I see that you've accepted my request. Let me request to unmute you. Okay, perfect.
Christabel Goff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. It seems overwhelmingly likely that visitors to the Hispanic Society will have come there motivated by an interest in the arts, anxious to view the celebrated connections. Such desires and sensibilities are not lost if a visitor has been stricken by a medical condition that makes it impossible to walk or to climb stairs. To install apparently off-the-shelf chairlifting equipment, which is extremely damaging to the architectural balance and decorative style of the museum, is not necessarily a benevolent gesture, since loss of what our professionals now delicately refer to as mobility does not necessarily transform the sufferer into an aesthetic barbarian. We offer these observations without hope. However, they stem from personal experience of navigating museums pushing wheelchairs. Many institutions offer better, more convenient, accessible entrance opportunities than what is being proposed here. Theoretically, opportunities such as those you are proposing, theoretically, such opportunities can be accused of being unequal because they are not always provided side by side with others or placed front and center. For those who have not experienced it, the experience of harnessing up to an external chair lift is very, very different from running up a flight of stairs in a beautiful courtyard. Museums housed in large Beaux-Arts buildings have the potential of creating normal street-level entrances leading to normal elevators that can access every level of the building, and buildings can be modified to provide access to outdoor terraces from within in ways much less visually disruptive of their architecture. and for the visitor, much more compatible with the still desired experience of normal life. It would be humane to take no action and to allow for a possible modification and consideration of alternatives to the proposed design. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Historic District Council, you should be receiving a request from me. Okay, I see you have accepted my request. Please just turn on your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, Michelle Arblew, the Historic Districts Council. HDC appreciates the complexity of this proposal and the challenges of incorporating these required modern elements sensitively into the complex. We therefore are supportive of the major elements of this proposal. We do, however, find the fence-mounted orange sign to be a bit too much and ask that the applicant and LPC work to find a more modest solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a glance back over. That was our signups. And I do not see any hands raised, so there's no one else who wishes to speak. And I will just add for the record that Manhattan Community Board 12 recommends approval of this application. And I'll hand it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much. And I think we do have a couple more questions. Commissioner Goldblum?
Right, thank you. Is it, I might have missed this, so I apologize if I'm asking something you answered already. Is a chairlift attached to a railing infeasible for the main entrance?
So I would say it's not infeasible. It's just that we would still need to build a platform at the top of the steps because the existing landing is both not at the level of the actual entry into the building, the threshold that goes into the building, and it's also not deep enough for a wheelchair. So we would still need to build out a platform. Once you build out a platform, of course, you're covering the existing stairs. So we needed to build the platform and the stairs.
Would it have to be the whole width of the stair, the platform?
Well, I guess I wish we could look at a plan together here.
Yeah, you should. If you click on the screen, you should.
Sure you can.
Oh, great. Okay. I thought maybe I had lost control. So let's look at this in plan. Give me one moment to get there. So in terms, yes, sorry, Margaret, go ahead.
So I just wanted to also add the doors make it a little more challenging as well.
Right, so I should also note that these doors, they swing, there's two sets of doors and those doors swing out. And so in order to have the turning radius, once you get off of the lift, you don't have enough space to open either door, actually.
So could you do a lift, could you do a platform that was like that with a lift going to it? That wouldn't work.
I think we would, well, because at the top of the landing, though, you need to have the 5-foot turning radius, and we don't have it when we use only half of the existing landing.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, this is Richard Southwick from Bar-Lunderbill. An option, interesting idea, an option could be, you do need to build the new stair because of the platform issue. You could have an inclined stair lift on the stair, whereas you enter either the stair or the lift from the same point instead of going around the backside. That would be an option. But you still have to do the platform and the new stair construction in any case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. You know, there were other comments raised in the testimony, and I'd like to ask the team if you'd like to address any of those other comments.
Richard Southwick again from Bar-Lunderbill. I think I would like to address Ms. Gow, excuse me if I've mispronounced your name, from the Society for the Architecture of the City. The overall master plan will eliminate all these reversible lifts. It's a really strong objective of the institution, of the Hispanic Society, to get people into the piano nobile, into the main court of the main building to be able to get into either small exhibitions in the main court or what I consider the jewel of the collection, the Soraya Gallery. And ultimately, you will be able to enter in the East Building, go up a grand stair or a accessible elevator and traverse the entire complex on the Piano Nobile, which is the second floor of the East Building, or the first floor above the stairs in the main building. We all very, very strongly want that to happen in the future, and it will. There is, believe me, we've looked at many, many other ways to get into this building, and other than coming into inaccessible service entrances on a steep slope on the side street, away from any of the main entrances, which is totally out of the spirit of ADA. We think coming in to the main entrance through that Beaux-Arts procession is really the most correct and most appropriate way to go.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Barron?
Yes, I realize that in looking at the 1919 image, that I just want some clarification. Does the lifted part in this image and in that year or in that period, was there actually a missing building on the 155 street between the two sort of corner buildings? Did that plinth and go all the way to 155th?
You're saying, what did it look like as if you were standing at this moment in time in 1919?
Yeah, I'm just curious if that building was an addition.
Yes.
It was. Aha.
Mm-hmm.
So really, there is a historic kind of partie that allows access to the center of this campus in the form of a cross, rather than just from Broadway. I mean, the original entry.
So the original entry was actually from the north, from 156th Street. And so you would come in as if the north building weren't there. You would walk through and come up through the main building. There was not access kind of at that empty spot. On this plan, you'll see where it says HSML East Addition, and in parentheses 1920. That was already raised as part of the terrace. There was not an entry into a building there.
Right. Just clarify that on 155th Street, there were buildings all the way across the length of 155th, or there was a gap. I'm just trying to understand if there was a gap between the two.
Yes, there was a gap, but that gap was not at grade. That gap existed, the terrace still existed at that location.
So it was a kind of a belvedere onto the street, a taller.
Yeah, that's correct.
You might add to that the main building was a freestanding building with the entrance to the north, as Kate has said. The east building was built as a second freestanding building. The gap you see was filled by the east addition in 1920. That photo, I think, was from 1919. So taken just before the construction. The interesting challenge is to change this Beaux-Arts procession from the north to a more unusual entry procession from the east to the west. And you never enter any of the entrances directly as you would in a very classical manner, but you cut across the flanks of the entrances of all the institutions as you go from Broadway all the way to the Academy of Arts and Letters to the west side of the site.
Thanks.
Margaret?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just to further clarify, that building that we're talking about, that wing from the 1920s, that is the only, there is a door from 155th Street, but it goes, there's a good flight, maybe 6 or 7 steps that go down and up. So it's not really a feasible option for us at this stage, because there's yet another set of stairs into the building. And there, for the main building, Again, there's no door to that level that we would like to get visitors. There's the only door in the main building is at a basement level, and there are a set of stairs on the exterior of the building to get to that door. So there are a number of challenges that we're not showing you here in terms of the interior of the building. But I do believe that our design team has really looked at all options and feel very comfortable with this solution that we're presenting is the best option with minimal, intervention.
And just say one more time why it is that you might not want to, and I understand stairs and so on, but why you might not want to kind of push on a main entry into the whole complex at the 155th Street, what is labeled as main building now. Is it because it's not on Broadway and you think that is somehow secondary, or because that's the ultimate approach desire, but that it's a phase 2? Why
Let me
not?
answer that one if I might.
Yeah.
I think the main reason is 155th Street is really the backside of all these very classical buildings. The entrances all face north. And it's really slinking into the cellar and the service areas of a side street rather than a institution that's coming off of an avenue. And it's a very inelegant way to enter a very elegant complex of buildings. Besides all of the physical challenges once you get into the building through one of those stores, and these are all just small service stores, and it's just not the right way to enter a significant institution like this.
Right. I should just say that, am I wrong in thinking that 155th Street does not read like a side street? Because of the cemetery and because of the view of the church and so on, it reads like an avenue. I mean, it's shortened, it's cut off as it goes west a bit, but it's
right. But all the elevations of the
Yeah.
buildings are side
Right.
street elevations, right?
Right.
You're turning your back on the significant, obvious entrances to the building, which you would not want the general public or the public with mobility impairments to enter. You really want to enter through the main entrances of the building.
Right, the campus sort of turns itself inward and the street-facing facades are.
Yeah, it's like entering a building at Lincoln Center from the side streets rather than from the plaza.
right, but you're not proposing to enter the building from its sort of original entry either. So do you have an elevational view of 156th of the whole thing?
155th?
Yes, let me get there.
156.
So I think we are proposing that you enter the campus through one of the original main entries, which would be into the East Building's main entry, and that it's all the way in the appendix. You'll have to give me just a moment to get there. And we are still proposing that the main building can be entered through its original main entrance, but rather that the accessible entry would be long-term through the East Building and then internal connections to get to the main building.
There's also there's always a possibility of entering through the main entrance to the main building. It does not provide you handicap accessibility, but for a number of reasons, we've selected the East Building because it's not the grand space of the museum, and we can then provide all of the contemporary museum amenities within that space, which would never be appropriate in the large court in the main building.
I think just on 156th Street, when before the library building was there, that was open, but that building was completed the whole campus was completed by 1930. So since 1930, there has never been an entrance from 156th Street.
Correct.
Okay, other questions? All right, I'm not seeing other questions, so I'm starting to send you all requests to unmute so that we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. All right, Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Devonshire, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. I do want to thank the commissioners who made it to the site visit yesterday. I think this is it's an incredible institution and an incredible campus, but it's complex. And so thinking about barrier-free access is complicated here because there are level changes on the exterior as well as on the interior. And there is a long-term plan to address barrier-free access to all of the buildings in a sort of integrated way with these symmetrically placed ramps. And the proposal is for some interim steps that would allow access as the museum is able to do this work. And that work would be largely on the interior that would allow ease of circulation on the inside so that once someone came down a ramp, they could go into the east building and then get to the rest of the buildings. And so, I think that there's that, and then there is the expanded elevator bulkhead and removing some very visible mechanical equipment and installing new mechanical equipment with some minimal visibility. And then the signage to let the community and the city know that this institution and its important collection and library exists. And so there are these sort of three components, but just starting with the sort of phased barrier-free access plan, I do want to point out that, there is no damage to historic fabric here. It's really a placeholder for a more integrated barrier-free access plan that would be part of down the road and part of the master plan. And so for me personally, I think an approach that doesn't involve reconstructing steps or creating new door openings where they don't exist it makes sense, because I think that those are more permanent changes that would only be for a temporary period of time. And so I think as an interim placeholder, something that is reversible is within the kind of realm of appropriateness that we can consider. And I think with these installations, the character of the buildings remain. They kind of are what they are. They're recognized for what they are. The complex will remain legible and strong. And I think, because of the strength of this and the sort of unity of this campus, I think it can really handle these reversible installations for a transitional period of time while benefiting all users in terms of equal access. So I think that's one way to think about these incremental steps toward barrier-free access and circulation for the museum. And so, but I think we'll talk about the circulation and barrier-free access, then the signage and the rooftop equipment. So let's begin our discussion. I'd like to start with some of those commissioners who were at the site visit and are really familiar with the site conditions. So Commissioner Holford Smith, would you start this one?
Sure. Well, it's very complicated, obviously, by the topography and the classical design that set all these buildings up or down sets of stairs. So I really understand the difficulty the designers had in trying to come up with a solution. I think their long-term solution will be great once they can rework the circulation internally to the buildings, but I understand that they don't have the funds to do that now. So for me, I think viewing these as the accessibility measures as temporary, long-term temporary is appropriate. And I think, besides maybe drilling into the granite steps, which happens with railings anyway, that's pretty much the extent of how these would basically touch the original fabric of these buildings. So I actually can find the proposed solutions acceptable. I think maybe the suggestion to eliminate the lift at the main building, which we have, as been described, we need that landing to create a level landing at the level of the existing building, not above that last step. Maybe instead of having the secondary lift to the side, it could just be an inclined stair that might make it less stuff. But I think either way that would be appropriate. I think the rooftop equipment is also minimally visible, and I think will not be distracted from the original, from the overall view of the building. So I think that they're okay as well. I think it's better to have them be discrete objects on the roof, to keep them as small as possible rather than try to screen them. And I agree with the change of color, to tone that down to match the limestone is a good decision. The signage, I appreciate that the society definitely needs signage. People need to know what this building is, but I think most people coming to this building will be coming here purposefully. They're not going to be wandering down the street and just decide to wander in. So I think that maybe they could cut back on some of the signage. I think the signage on the fence is appropriate because it's right at eye level. I think the 3 banners on the north face of the east building are a little too much, maybe just the one over the main entrance. And not as sure about the one on this 155th, because it seems like most people would be coming from the north, and then maybe that's not as important, but maybe people coming across from the east side, maybe 1 banner on Broadway. I don't know.
Okay.
Let's see what other people think about that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Gustafson, you were also on the site visit.
You went the opposite direction I thought you were going to go. On the accessibility issues, I think that it certainly is true that when you experience it personally, you really do understand that it is an incredibly complex set of circumstances. And I think the key driver here is the fact that this is not the permanent result. Now, that said, I've spent my life working with nonprofits, and so 2 years becomes 5 years, becomes 15 years. So I would like us to consider whether we want to have them come back to us on a periodic basis as time progresses on the accessibility projects, only because they are such major changes. I'm okay with the 2 approaches that they're doing here. And I agree, I think, with Commissioner Holford Smith that there's, considering that they are temporary, I wouldn't want to do a whole lot more elaborate changes and potentially more damage to the structures, even though this may be somewhat obtrusive, particularly on the main building. The rooftop addition equipment, I think, is a no-brainer for me. There's no, it's minimally visible, and in some areas actually less visible than it was before. On the signage on the fence, I think, is fine. I was truly surprised that the fence is a recent addition. It actually has looks terrific for when it was installed. But it is, so putting a signage on that fence doesn't really matter to me much at all. I think that's well located, as Commissioner Holford Smith said. I am concerned, as I think it was Christabel who mentioned the possibility of banner signs becoming permanent additions to the facades of our institutional buildings, and that does concern me. And here, I think we probably have twice as much in terms of banner signage as we actually would be useful to them. If you are on this angle, is a perfect angle to understand why it's overkill, because if you're coming from the north, you are going to see that signage on the fence, and you're not going to be able to miss it. You're going to know exactly what you're looking at. Do they need something coming from the south? Perhaps one on the south, but it's. I think this is a bit of overkill. Back to the accessibility issues. We have to keep in mind, I think, that there will be a new accessibility plan down the road that will not do these, will not be as obtrusive, that will not do all of these things that right now might cause us some hesitation, and we may have to simply be patient, in that, counting what we used to call nonprofit days, which are even longer than dog years. So I'm actually happy to approve this. I think it's appropriate, with the exception of adjusting the signage issue.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum, you also joined us for the site visit.
Thank you. I guess I agree with some things and disagree with others of what people have said so far. I think that the rooftop, the bulkhead is acceptable as drawn. I have a feeling that if you looked at that air conditioning layout, you might be able to squeeze it a little bit and make it a little less visible from the plaza. Just looking at it, it seemed like that's something that might be feasible if they were to work with staff. I think the accessibility at Broadway, the lift is fine, and I think it should be black. I think that the lift at the main entrance should be changed from a very large platform, new stair and side lift to a chair lift that was attached to a railing, in order to preserve the sense of access and the general directionality of the access more effectively. It should cost about the same as what they're doing now, and will be less impactful of the experience of the entrance, and will actually, I think, make the entrance experience for anybody, whether they are going to need those assistances or not, more consistent with the historic access. So I think that should be, we should take Richard up on his offer to explore that. In terms of the signage, I take a different view. I think that the permanent dish signage, which is on the fence, is too big. If you look at the scale of those letters, they're just too darn big. However, I think that the building at the moment, when it's in large measure unutilized or underutilized, that there's not enough. I think that the banners, as a temporary device to draw people to this, we have to get people in the neighborhood and people in the city used to coming to this place. It needs to generate interest, and I think that, given the large number of banners that we have on active, thriving museums, this building, which is, I don't think anyone would characterize as thriving yet, it needs to generate a little bit of pulse. And I think that the placement of banners should be symmetrical and consistent with the architecture, but I think you could have more. And I certainly don't object to what's there. I kind of think that the one on Broadway that's kind of off center is peculiar, even though I understand that it's symmetrical about the corner. But I do think that whatever banners are placed should be placed in such a way that they reinforce the symmetry and kind of Beaux-Art formality of the complex. But I mean, in these buildings, the windows are blocked up, for goodness sakes. It's kind of, the streetscape is very quiet and recessive. I think it needs pulse. And I think that as long as the signage is permitted under the context of a very temporary situation, that, let's hope that when phase 2 rolls around and we can do the full rehabilitation of these buildings in their glory, that we will then be able to reduce the amount of signage extraordinarily.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Shamir Baran, you also joined us for the site visit.
Yes. Firstly, I just want to say that this is just such an important and extraordinary project, and I'm so hopeful that it can be mounted and realized at the kind of capacity that they hope for it, because the intersection, the block, the relationship to the cemetery and to the church, this whole moment here is so unknown to so many people in the city, and I think it's just incredibly important as a kind of a bigger preservation that is to this region of the city. So I'm just a huge supporter of everything that they're attempting to do here. And I think that I agree in most part with Commissioner Holford-Smith's approach to this, this idea that while I very much take to heart Christabel Guff's points about the sort of the slight pretense at sort of equality or equitability of access, when in fact there is true difference to the experience. I think that those are important points for us to think about as we're thinking about and rethinking accessibility standards generally. But that aside for a moment, the idea of a kind of temporary, and again, as you've said, not in our landmarks way, but temporary as in terms of timing for these impermanent accessibility methods from getting to the street through before all of the interior renovations have been completed is acceptable and appropriate. I think that and I agree also with Commissioner Holford-Smith about the possibility of a kind of a ramped stair rather than an actual lift, if that's a possibility, but not a must. The mechanical systems, I think, are properly considered, and as Commissioner Goldblum says, if it's possible for them to squeeze a bit out of them and to shrink them down even more, that would be good. I think that in terms of signage, the signage on the sort of the corner, both 155th as well as Broadway, those two banners are important to understand, so that we understand that this building does turn the corner, that it does sort of is nearly a full block, so people begin to understand the size of it. So both of those, I think, are appropriate to stay. In terms of the signage on the interior of the courtyard, that is those three signs, I think those can be pared down to one, either on the center of the door or close to and any one of them, but I don't think three are really required, and I'm in favor of the signage on the rail, on the fence.
Sorry, forgive me. Okay, Commissioner Chapin, I think you weren't with us.
Yeah.
Some of the comments, yeah.
Yeah, I've been there. I have been to the site for exhibition some years ago. And it was a great experience. And I had no idea really that the facility was there before I first went as a result of reading about an exhibition. I feel that these temporary provisions for access are acceptable because they're temporary, and I think they are really necessary. And it is the kind of facility that you want to enter from this side, really, because of how the institutions are laid out and how it presents itself on Broadway. So I think that really works. And I think the rooftop structures are, sort of typical of things that have to be on institutions and are not very visible. Of course, if they can be somewhat less visible, that would be fine, but I don't think they're really a problem. With regard to the signage, I'm in Commissioner Goldblum's, opinion, basically, which is that I think the signage on the building, the banners, is very typical of what we've permitted in other institutions, and that this is a site where you want to draw people from the neighborhood, and not just people who might have heard about an exhibition, but people that would find out there is such a facility, either in their neighborhood or as they're driving by and they notice it. So to me, it's not, it's not like it's commercial advertising. It's for an art and museum institution. And I don't think that this is out of keeping with what we permitted previously. As far as the signage on the fence, it looks to be about the size of that on Cooper Union, which they showed as an example. And I think if that's the case, that I'm okay with that as well. So that's, I think I've covered all the aspects there. And I think, this is these are very necessary for the short term for this institution, short term, long term, but until they can get more funding together. And one of the ways they're going to get more funding together is to get more, people coming to the facility and seeing it. So.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Devonshire, I know you weren't on the site visit, but I know you're familiar with this campus as well.
I am familiar with the campus. I worked for 3 years on the restoration of Chapel of the Intercession. And one interesting, generally unknown thing is that Bertram Goodhue considered the Intercession to be his masterpiece, and his body is interred in one of the walls of the sanctuary. Kind of interesting.
Oh.
In any case, I used to spend most of my lunch times at Audubon Terrace. So with regard to the mechanicals on the roof, I think everything there is fine. With regard to the accessibility features, it was noted that these are temporary, but it was also noted that these could be temporary from 5 to 10 years. And that's 100% increase for me. And so I would say that what would be approvable is the handicap measures with a time limit, which would also be an incentive for the institution to raise funds to have the final solution created. With regard to signage, I do think, as Adi mentioned, that southeast corner, it's okay to have 2 banners on that corner. I agree with the opinion that there should be 1 banner on the north facade. I do not agree with the signage on the fence at all. I think I don't like it on the Cooper Union, and I think it cheapens the dignity of this complex to have a large sign on it. People coming to this complex will see the banners. They'll know where they are.
Okay. All right. I want to thank everybody for your very thoughtful comments. And I think that we actually may be able to move forward.
Everardo.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's on my next page. I didn't turn the page. Everardo. Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead.
This is a wonderful place. And I remember going to the museum and just being amazing museum with the red walls. It's just a wonderful place. From the list, the Broadway lift, acceptable. The main building lift, it's a little heavy and should be rethought a little bit. It should be simplified. I think simplification of that, all those components would make it a better solution. The bulkhead and elevators are fine. Um, the banners, I think they're wonderful. I think I've walked up this path many times, and it needs the banners. It needs that life. The fence, fine with me. I think it's okay. It's a heavy, enthusiastic fence, but that's okay. That's fine. And everything else is fine with me. I find it acceptable.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So I think where that leaves us is that I think can make a motion to move ahead with an approval with some modifications. One, to study the feasibility of doing a inclined stair or chairlift at the main building entrance, to reduce the size of the letters on the fence, and to study the combination of and placement of total number and placement of banners on the main building in consultation with the staff. So I can go ahead and make that motion. Diana, did you have one more comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that the reason I thought more than one banner was needed is that institutions really need to be able to advertise exhibits, and they were demonstrating that one of their banners would probably be an exhibit banner. And so I think that just having one is really inadequate for that purpose. And I just wanted to give my rationale. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay, great. Good, thanks. Okay, so let me try to make this motion, and we'll see where we come out. Right. Matter of docket number 22-06782, 613 West 155th Street, the Audubon Terrace Historic District, a neo-Renaissance style institutional building designed by Charles P. Huntington and built in 1904. This is an application to install barrier-free access lifts, rooftop mechanical equipment, and bulkheads and signage. And I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Audubon Terrace Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed work will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features, that this historic complex with its stairs and terraces poses significant barriers to making the complex accessible, and that maintaining the existing temporary ramps and installing lifts and stairs to help provide barrier-free access to a main entrance of the complex in the is the, let's say, least intrusive means possible. That the ramps, lifts, and stair will be removed once long-term plans currently in development for improving access throughout the complex are developed, approved, and implemented. That the placement of the barrier-free access installations at the level of the bases of the monumental facades, combined with their simple designs and neutral finishes, will help them to remain a subordinate presence. That the modifications to the modern fencing associated with the inclined lift installation will be well integrated into the design of the ironwork, thereby helping the fence to remain harmonious with the formality of the terraces. That the proposed banners will be consistent with the types of signage typically used for institutional buildings of this age to advertise their presence and programs. That the banners will only be installed at a limited number of bays and set back from the colonnades, leaving the design at several matching bays visible and maintaining the primacy of the colonnades. That all of the attachments of the barrier-free access installations and banners will be at existing mortar joints to prevent, to the extent possible, existing mortar joints to the extent possible with minimal amount of penetrations to the historic masonry. That the proposed letters mounted on the existing fence will be consistent with signs at institutional complexes of this scale and will be anchored at modern fencing only. That when seen from public thoroughfares, below the level of the monumental colonnades and against a background of modern fencing. Slightly reduced letters will remain a subordinate presence. That the hold off on that one, that the construction of the proposed bulkhead will improve circulation within and between the buildings, facilitate moving large artworks, and support long-term plans for the future barrier-free access improvements. That when seen from the terraces within the historic district, the bulkhead will only be visible from select vantage points adjacent to an existing bulkhead of the same height and will not diminish the historic silhouette of the buildings. That the simple design and massing of the bulkhead and its materials and finishes matching those of the existing bulkhead will help it remain a harmonious secondary presence. That the cumulative effect of the replacement of the existing HVAC equipment and the construction of a bulkhead will reduce the amount and prominence of rooftop accretions in views of the complex from the south and east, and that the proposed work will support the special architectural, historic, and cultural significance of the Audubon Terrace Historic District. However, I recommend that the applicants continue to work in consultation with the staff to explore an inclined stair or stair lift at the main building entrance, at the feasibility of that at the main building entrance, to reduce the height of the letters of the sign on this fence, and to study the overall number and placement of the banners at the east building. Okay, and I think I got everything there. Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Without a time limitation, nay.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
So same as Commissioner Devonshire, without the time limitation, nay.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 6 in favor and 2 opposed, the motion passes.
Thank you. So please continue to work with the staff, and we will hopefully be checking in with you routinely to see how things are going, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move to public hearing item number 4, LPC 22-05211, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1501, Lot 4, 1083 Fifth Avenue in the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. This is a Beaux-Arts-style townhouse designed by Turner and Killian and built in 1901 to 02, with significant alterations by Ogden Codman in 1913 to 15. The application is to alter the areaway and construct an areaway wall.
Hey, commissioners, the applicants now have control of the presentation. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
My camera doesn't seem to be working right now. Just let me. I no longer see the button to activate the camera at the bottom.
That's okay, we can hear you. You can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse, whichever you prefer.
Okay, this is Brian Connolly, the architect for 1083 Fifth Avenue. I'm joined here also by our preservation consultant, Rhonda Wist. I'll be doing most of the presentation of the material, but Rhonda will be joining me to answer questions afterwards. Okay, so let's start with the first page, naturally. We have a nice segue here from the last project. 1083 Fifth Avenue was originally built as the home for the philanthropist Arthur M. Huntington, who, as it turns out, was one of the early benefactors of the Audubon project. The proposal here is for the creation of a new limestone wall and railing and gate to define and create a transitional space, and planting at 1083 Fifth Avenue, as almost invariably occurs along the upper residential part of Fifth Avenue and frequently elsewhere in the Upper East Side generally.
Historically, the term avenue referred to a broad roadway or street with trees and other greenery on both sides. And with the Central Park greenery on its west side and the planted transitional spaces fronting all of the residential buildings on its east side, this upper residential portion of Fifth Avenue comes closest to being the only true avenue in Manhattan. Today, one of the unique and defining characteristics of the upper part of Fifth Avenue is that greenery on both sides and the transitional spaces that help soften the visual movement from the purely public space, the sidewalk, into the purely private space of the residential buildings. And as the historical photos are going to show, there's precedent for these features at the 1083 property. The proposal also called for the replacement of a deteriorated and incongruent sidewalk at the same address. When I say incongruent, it's a discolored sidewalk for some reason, taken out and replaced a number of years ago with an ochre gravel in it. Overall, the work forms part of a plan for stewardship of the building by the new owner under separate applications, which we've already been through at staff level. The owner's committed to a full restoration of the exterior masonry, not only on the Fifth Avenue facade, but on the very extensive north side facing the church, and also on the rear and courtyard elevations. Windows have been replaced with new double glazing that matches the historical design. An incongruous bulkhead above the building was removed under a separate application and corrected. And the plan calls also for removing metal doors and windows at the first floor, which were installed by the National Academy of Design when they were using the building until recently. Moving on to the second page. Oops. Okay. Moving on to the second sheet, the plan at the top where my cursor is, that's 1083 Fifth Avenue. 1083 until very recently was part of a 3-building campus used by the National Academy of Design. They had 1083 Fifth Avenue, which is this light building here. They had 3 East 89th Street, which was perpendicular to it and accessed from 89th Street. And they also had 5-7 East 89th Street on the same side. The 3 buildings were individually separated and sold to 3 separate owners. 1083 is being restored to its original use, which was as a single-family townhouse for Archer Huntington. Moving down to the photographs on the left, that's the photograph of the building as it was left after National Academy of Design occupied the 3-building campus. At the very bottom, you'll see that National Academy of Design put in aluminum storefront type doors and aluminum glazing, and those are going to be restored to Codman's original design, and that's being handled under separate application. Moving over to the next photograph, you see this unusual ochre color sidewalk that was installed during the National Academy of Design's residency in the building. That sidewalk was poorly done. It's failing. There's cracks, there's water penetration through it. And we're looking to replace it with a sidewalk that matches the color of the typical sidewalk on either side. The next photograph is just a view of the sidewalk from the south. And this view is where shows the area where my cursor is now, which is where we're hoping to put in a transitional space. The separate issue is indicated by these photographs on the right. Lacking any specific boundaries on the sidewalk as other properties have in this area. There's often spillover of cafe tables. There's often so much bike delivery going on in Manhattan right now. There's bikes left up against the building. And often at times of the day when the cafe is very busy, there's lines of people for takeaway food that effectively go right across the entrance door of 1083 Fifth Avenue, making access difficult and potentially threatening egress at other times. This page shows, oops. This page shows the evolution of the property from 1904 through to 2018 when it was purchased by the current owner. On the top left-hand side, you see 4 townhouses. The 3 on the left were designed and built at the same time by Turner and Killian architects. They all demonstrate some form of transition zone, either behind limestone balusters, steps, railings, plantings, gates, the type of features that were typical of Fifth Avenue residences in the past and many buildings on Fifth Avenue today. The building all the way on the right at the left of that first photograph, that's the first iteration of 1083 Fifth Avenue designed by Turner and Killian. And you can see there's a red brick facade with limestone detailing at that time. The next photograph over just shows more clearly the 3 Turner and Killian buildings. You can again see the brick facade with limestone detailing, and you can see the stoops and areaways and railings that were in front of all 3 of those houses. Moving over to the third picture on the top row, we don't know the exact date of that photograph, but we know it's after 1915 because on the far left of that picture, you can see the Ogden-Codman facade. Codman replaced the Turner and Killian facade almost in its entirety and clad the building in limestone with the exception of a granite course at the curb. Moving on to the first photograph on the bottom row, this is the 1940 tax lot photo, and you can more clearly see what Codman did to the building in this stage. One thing, the most noticeable thing he did was he lowered the entrance by about 18 to 20 inches and removed the steps and the areaway in front of the building in order to create a vehicular access. Codman had both this building and the 3 East 89 building forming an L-shaped residence wrapping around the corner buildings that you see in the photograph directly above. When Archer Huntington was living in the conjoined buildings, the pedestrian access was largely done from 3 East 89, and his carriage access was through the Fifth Avenue entrance. So curiously, this tax photo dates from 1940. And 1940 was the last year that this property was on the New York City tax roll. In 1940, Archer Huntington donated this building, 3 East 89, and several other properties to the National Academy of Design for their use and investment benefit. But after 82 years, the building's actually going back onto the tax roll as a single family residence again. The next photograph over was taken circa 1959 or 1960. You can't fully see 1083 Fifth Avenue. You can see a sliver of it on the left-hand side. I'm just pointing out that at that point, they had one of the typical canopies that extended from the building to the curb for pickup and drop off. The final photograph here was taken in 2018. You can see the storefront that the National Academy of Design added, or they changed on the lower ground floor. They replaced the Codman windows and Codman door with metal windows and glass. They also lowered the left and right window more in a commercial, to create a more commercial setting, allowing people greater access into the museum building and any card or postcard shops they had inside at the time. Moving on to the next page here, the drawing on the extreme left is the full first floor plan, which was Codman's drawing that we located in the Avery Library. The middle drawing is a blow up of the area showing the carriage vestibule that Codman created. And as a result of wanting a carriage entrance there, and as I mentioned earlier, he dropped the floor level down flush with that of the street outside. And in order to facilitate the entrance by carriages, he removed low walls, any railings, any areaways that were in that, directly in front of the building. The drawing on the right, that's a contemporary drawing drawn to the same scale as Codman's drawings. And the dashed lines indicated in red They show the extent of the former areaway, stoops and steps that predated the Codman renovation. We know the location of those walls because the foundations below are still evident. The former stoop came out about 15 feet off the property line. The proposed work that we're going to demonstrate in the next few pages is not intended to come out that far. We're doing a much smaller, we're proposing a much smaller areaway than the one that predated Codman's work on the building.
Mr. Connolly, as we move forward, could we ask that you pick up the pace so that we can fit in the rest of our schedule? Thank you.
Okay. Very quickly then, the next two pages both show, sorry, the screen's hopping, apologies. Okay. On the right-hand diagram there, you can see this 25-foot zone that's controlled by the Department of Transport. It extends along the property line right out to the curb, all the way down Fifth Avenue until some of the lower 60th streets. And historically, the DOT has allowed greening of the sidewalk there. They've allowed architectural enrichments, including railings, stoops, steps, gates, and so on, all to enhance a kind of pedestrian experience that's somewhat unique to Fifth Avenue, certainly in the amount of greenery and architectural detail it provides in that area. Moving on to this page, what we did is we showed a number of somewhat similar, there's certainly no identical buildings what we're working on, but we looked at examples of low walls, plantings, low walls combined with railings on townhouse type buildings along Fifth Avenue and on the side streets. The top 6 photographs are of buildings all along Fifth Avenue itself, and the lower 6 buildings are in the immediate neighborhood on the side streets. One thing we would note that's different in our case, most of these buildings still retain steps up to the front door, and consequently between the steps and the landings, they were able to create a transition space forward of the property itself. Our situation doesn't have the steps or the landing, but we proposed a gate which might do something similar to what the steps are doing in these houses here. Okay, this drawing shows the existing conditions at, the left part of the drawing shows the existing conditions at 1083 Fifth Avenue. You can see there's planters on the adjoining apartment building to the south, and there's a number of planters on the curb on buildings on either side. This drawing shows the scale of what we're proposing, which is somewhat similar to the scale of planting at the 1080 apartment block, but because the facade of 1080 bows out, we're projecting a little further than the neighboring one, albeit trying to maintain a somewhat small scale to the work. This drawing I'll skip over quickly. That's just the existing conditions. And the next drawing shows the proposed work for the areaway in front of that design. I'd emphasize again here that the former stoop on this property came out about 15 feet. We're coming out considerably less, barely 2/3 of that, to somewhat align with the planter of the adjoining apartment building, albeit stretched out towards the center because of the bow front on 1050. On the top right of this drawing, the photograph, it's mistakenly captioned as railing at 5th floor. It's actually the railing at the 4th floor. And the iron gate we proposed is a variation on the motif used in the existing railings on 1083 Fifth Avenue. Finally, these are the conventional details of the construction of the low wall and the concrete. And you can see in the photographs on the left, the poor condition that the existing sidewalk is in. But probably most egregiously, I think it's the change in color that's dissonant in the neighborhood, and we're looking to replace the concrete with concrete that'll match the color of the adjoining 2 buildings. And we do know already, we've surveyed the joints will line up from the 1080 apartment building through 1083 Fifth Avenue and to the joints in front of the Church of Heavenly Rest. Finally, these 3 views, I think, sum up the intent of what we tried to achieve with the design. We certainly didn't want to create an areaway comparable to the one that preceded the Codman renovation. We wanted to create something that was more suitably scaled both to its immediate neighbor at 1080 Fifth Avenue, but also respected the architectural needs of the house itself. So had we gone out as far as the pre-Codman, it would be out at this sidewalk joint here. What we did is we set the most protruding part of the wall at the gates in such a way that the gates had ample space to open into the property and still leave a sort of an arrival point before the door. But rather than square that off, which would have left the approach views much bigger than necessary, we tapered the wall using a curve back to approximate the position of the neighboring planters. But what that also does is help to mitigate the scale and the apparent perception size of the planter at 1083. In an appendix, I'll mention briefly that Francis Morone, who wasn't able to attend today, Francis's credentials include a great deal of research on both Edith Wharton and Ogden Codman, and he noted in particular that He noted in particular that the transitional space, a buffer that is standard and one may say necessary feature of the Manhattan townhouse typology. He went on to say that as the design of the original Turner and Killian houses attests, and as is evident elsewhere on the avenue, townhouses with their entrances on the avenue have historically conformed to the standard Manhattan house typology of the buffer between sidewalk and house front. It therefore seems out of keeping with the historic residential typologies that 1083 Fifth Avenue alone should be a private residence on the avenue to be without this standard accoutrement. And Francis conclude, I do not feel that it in any way compromises the architectural integrity of Codman's design. What's more, I feel that it brings the house into a better contextual alignment with other buildings in its Fifth Avenue neighborhood. From an architectural and urbanistic perspective, it is a small thing. From a homeowner's perspective, it is a large thing. It represents no alteration to the house's fabric, and as such is consistent with the historic preservation practice. I strongly urge its approval. And I'd like to mention again, just one of the things that we did in the design of the wall. I'll go back to the plan. Because if DOT approves it after landmarks, it'll be done under revocable consent. So should the wall need to be removed at any time in the future, we tried to design it in a way that it was fully reversible. The nearmost corner pedestals don't physically touch the house. The planting between the wall and the house will be in independent planters. We're not scoring waterproofing lines up against the Codman elevation. If the revocable consent was enforced and the wall and planting was removed, there would be no physical damage to Codman's original design.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll move to public testimony and we'll come back to you after that. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And I will turn it over to Sasha Seeley to take us through the testimony.
Alrighty, thank you. So I'm going to start with my sign up. So I have Historic District Council. You will be receiving a request from me. All right, HDC, I see you have accepted my request. Please just turn on your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, Michelle Arblew, the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the proposed front areaway walls and small stoop to be sensitively designed and an appropriate solution for creating a buffer between the sidewalk and the building's front door. We find the proposed gate to be inappropriate and ask that the LPC reject this portion of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, friends of the Upper East Side, you will be receiving a request from me right now. Okay. All right, I see you have accepted my request. Please just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, this is Laura Varielli representing Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Chair Carroll and Honorable Commissioners, as a disclaimer, Rhonda West of West Preservation Associates sits on Friends' Board of Directors. However, she has not participated in any discussion regarding this application. Friends sympathizes with the owner's desire for privacy and security. However, the proposed design is rather incongruous with the style and character of both the townhouse and of Fifth Avenue. This building is a fine example of Codman's work, and we appreciate the careful consideration to not disrupt the existing historic fabric of the facade. Nonetheless, we believe a more restrained proposal to be more appropriate. Most of the precedents shown by the applicant display lower planters enclosed by simple fencing or areaway walls with little to no details, and none of the entrances are gated. The proposed metal gate is a jarring addition, significantly detracting from the building's character and not in keeping with its style. As mentioned, Friends Preservation Committee understands the desire to create a buffer zone between the public sidewalk and private residents, but we believe that can be successfully accomplished without completely enclosing the areaway. We urge the applicant to work with the commission to come back with a more restrained proposal with subdued details and without a gate. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a glance back over. And I do not see any more hands raised, so there is no one else that wishes to speak. And I will just mention for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends denial of this application, finding the proposed work only complements the new main entrance door rather than the historic building. And I will hand it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to turn back to the applicant team and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard.
Yes, and I think in particular, if I could go back to the page that showed the other townhouses. I don't seem to be able to control the screen right now.
Could you let me know what page you're looking for?
Yes, if you could go to page 06. Okay. No, we identified these houses which did not have gates, but as I'd mentioned earlier, they had the advantage of steps, which created they sort of emphasized the privacy of that area without the need for a gate. In our case, we don't have the benefit of steps coming from the front door out to the outer edge of the area wall. And that's why we felt that the gate was more appropriate. And in discussing it with staff, I believe that was their recommendation as well.
Hi, Chair Carroll. Hi, this is Rhonda West.
Yes.
So I just also wanted to respond to a few points. The first thing is in terms of we don't believe that the way that this is designed, which relates to the original design, but is significantly smaller. We don't think that it detracts from the landmark. We believe that it is consistent with the other mansions along Fifth Avenue and on the side streets in that vicinity. It would be very difficult to find a mansion that has no transitional zone whatsoever. We believe that the design doesn't call attention to itself. We're also looking at the Codman vehicular entrance, and this was almost treated as Francis Maroney says, like a rear door. And if you note in the tax photo from 1940, there's no curb cut. So we don't know how often on the lower left of this sheet, thank you. We don't really know how often this was even used in this fashion. So remember that their pedestrian entrance was on 89th. And also, if you look at the photos that we have from the early 20th century, there's not a human to be found on the street. Fifth Avenue in this location has changed quite a bit with the cafe next door, with the dentist's offices, with the Guggenheim and the Metropolitan Museum and the runner's entrance at 90th Street. So we're not looking for privacy so much as just this transition zone to take somebody from public to private in the absence of the butlers that everybody had at the beginning of the 20th century. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any final questions? Okay, I don't. Yes, go ahead.
We have a letter that we're not sure if you've got it yet.
The owner received just late last night, and I'm not sure if it was sent to Sarah or testimonies at LPC. It was a letter of support from the neighboring building, the Church of the Heavenly Rest. It's very brief. And it just says, "Dear Chair Carroll and Commissioners, the Church of the Heavenly Rest is the next door neighbor to the north of 1083 Fifth Avenue. We write in support of the proposed low wall to be installed in front of 1083 Fifth Avenue. We have been very pleased to see the building's ongoing careful restoration. Most Fifth Avenue buildings have some sort of division between the public space and the interior private space. We understand the low wall will provide an element of safety and protection, and we are excited to once again have a real next door neighbor and want the restored building to have all the elements needed to become a home. We support this project and thank the Commission for its consideration."
Okay, thank you. All right, so if there are no other questions or final comments, I think we'll move to our discussion. So let's have a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
I so motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. So this is, as we've been shown, a house that has evolved over time, and particularly its ground floor, in addition to the redesign of the facade, but the ground floor has evolved multiple times and is returning to a single family home. As the building is returning to a single family home, they would like to install an areaway that includes a low wall and a low gate and some planters. And, I think that it's important to note that the Commission has approved areaways in front of other townhouses in the Upper East Side Historic District, including those with gates that are low and don't obstruct from the design of the original building. So with that in mind, we can maybe have a conversation and a discussion about this particular proposal. So Commissioner Gustafson, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think typicality is kind of the issue here. As the presentation showed, these kinds of areaways are common. I did have some concern about gating it off, but my understanding is that although the applicant didn't show any instances where these areaways were gated off, that the staff confirms that this is done on a routine basis on Fifth Avenue. The height of the gate, I think, is in its favor, which is to say, unlike I think we saw an application the other day where we had a gated in areaway and it interfered with the ornate entrance and work around the entrance. And here it's very low and doesn't interfere with any of that. So I think this is appropriate as is.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith?
Yes, I think it's appropriate. And actually, I'm going to have to jump off for another call right now.
Okay.
So I apologize, but I find this appropriate. And it seems like it's reversible as well.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, well, I totally was in favor of the, sort of low planted areas, and I was quite concerned about the gates. So it is the case that we have several on Fifth Avenue, Sarah, that are gated.
Well, we have not, there are, limited numbers of townhouses on Fifth Avenue, as many places for apartment buildings, but I can say throughout the district, the Commission has approved new areaways in front of row houses with gates that enclose the green space transition zone.
Yeah, that was my concern, Because I was going to say maybe they could just do a chain or something if they wanted was separation as opposed to an actual gate. It is low, and if it is appropriate to the district, I can approve it as presented.
Commissioner Goldblum?
I agree. I think it's appropriate. I think I mean, I usually hate these gates in this district and on the east side in general. I think they're antisocial, but here, given the particular location, the width of the sidewalk, the proximity to the museum, and the crowded nature of this particular area, and the fact that it's quite low, I think it is an appropriate design, even with the gate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devonshire?
I'm okay with this, and because the gate is low, I think it's approvable.
Commissioner Jefferson?
I can approve this. They're defining a space.
Here's your reminder.
The wall does that, but the gate encloses space. But listening to other commissioners, I would accept it.
Okay, great. So I think we do have enough to approve this. So Mr. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make the motion?
In the matter of LPC 22-05211, 1083 Fifth Avenue in the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District, the application is to alter the areaway and construct an areaway wall. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. I further note that this building has a history of change, including the circa 1913 removal of the original shallow stoop and decorative fence for the introduction of a carriage entrance. I recommend approval, finding that the work will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features, that low stone walls or curbs with metal railings and gates are typical features found at areaways fronting houses of this age and style within this historic district, that the wall will be installed at sidewalk paving and will not impact the masonry facade, and therefore its installation is easily reversible, that the proposed 7-foot depth of the encroachment onto the sidewalk will not overwhelm the streetscape, that the proposed materials, details, and finishes are harmonious with architectural details found at the primary facade, and will help the wall and gate maintain a subordinate relationship to the Beaux-Arts style of the house, and that the work will not detract from the architectural or historic character of the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Devonshire, would you second that motion?
I second.
Thank you. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
With 6 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
That's approved. Thank you. And we'll move to the next and final item.
Yes, and that is public hearing item number 5, LPC 22-06581, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1409, lot 68, 112 East 75th Street in the Upper East Side Historic District. This is a modern style synagogue building designed by Schumann and Lichtenstein and built in 1964 to 68. And the application is to alter the facade, enclose the recessed ground floor, and replace windows.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Stephen, you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. Perfect. And advance the slides. You need to unmute yourself, please. State your name for the record, and you may begin.
Stephen, shall I begin?
Thank you. Yes, I was about to say, Andrew Hoffman, board chair from Temple Israel, is actually going to lead us off. That'll be followed by Elizabeth Lieber from BBB, and then myself. Thank you.
My name is Andrew Hoffman. I'm the board chair of the historic Temple Israel of the city of New York that was founded in 1870, and I thank the commissioners for their consideration of this application. Temple Israel has been in its current location on East 75th Street since 1967, and this is the first major renovation of our building. Temple Israel has embarked on this renovation as we have outgrown our current space due to a number of factors. We have had significant growth in the congregation since the 1960s, when our synagogue was initially designed for an aspirational 350 members, being that we only had 150 members in 1967. We now have a thriving congregation of almost 650 members. Our open courtyard is heavily used, but not protected from the elements. We need this additional enclosed space for many reasons, including gathering before and after our worship services, breakout space for our nursery and religious school programs, and an area to be used as family gathering space before life cycle events such as funerals, bar mitzvah celebrations, and events surrounding the birth of children. Additionally, in these times of rising anti-Semitism, it is troubling that an institution such as ours is required to have a more formal and secure building entrance, one that our existing configuration cannot provide for. Lastly, our infrastructure needs work. Part of this project includes the renewal of systems at the end of their useful life, and we are also working on complying with Local Law 97, including the replacement of thermally inefficient windows and doors. Again, I want to thank you for your time and consideration of our application, and now I'd like to turn it over to our architect, Elizabeth Lieber, to present our plans to you.
Thanks, Andrew. This is Liz Lieber, Beyer Blinder Bell Architects, and good afternoon to all. Steve, I'll let you know to advance. Advance, thank you. So the position of Temple Israel within the Upper East Side Historic District boundary that you can see here. Next. And then, of course, seeing it historically, where it replaced two what was called urban garages from the days we assume before Park Avenue had its railroad depressed. So this is a block that was in transition, of course. Next. And that was, of course, reflected in the designation report for the district, and that Temple Israel was called the most unusual building on the block as the contemporary Temple Israel, designed by Schumann and Lichtenstein. Next. So for the designation itself, that Temple Israel, they called out the opening at the ground floor with the recessed curved wall, so both the opening and the drum, the blank wall at the building line for 3 stories, and was given in the modern style, and of course was dated from 1964 to 1968. And you can see this photo, which we chose to use from 1984, because it's a photo that shows after the designation, but of course before a fence was put up, which I'll show you later in the presentation. But you can tell that that void obviously is a part of the design of the architecture, which we'll talk about in a bit. Next. We also thought it was interesting to bring out these 2 drawings from the archives, and I think that this shows this sort of interesting design tension and aspirations with this brutalist building, both to reveal the geometry of the drum, which is the sanctuary at the ground floor, and then classrooms and offices at the upper floors, so that you can try to perceive a consistency between these 2 geometric shapes. Of course, aspirationally daylit on the image at left, whereas at right, you can get a sense of also wanting it to have this sort of unadorned facade that kind of looms over a darker void for contrast and for austerity. So I think this is a building that's trying to be, in a sense, doing 2 things at once. And it's something that we recognized as we went forward with our design. Next. And some more photographs just that we pulled from the archive from 1967 in sort of a pristine state, as it were. Next. And then, of course, with changes over time, in around 1991, a gate was added, not presumably for security reasons, to sort of create a space that they could use, but it was admittedly not weather protected. I think it's interesting, looking back at the certificate of appropriateness, that quoting from it, the installation of the fence will give the building some street presence and mitigate the large void created by the recessed ground floor. Next. So here we are just seeing it from the site plan from up above. You can see the site of it. Next. And then both aerial views showing its primary facade from the northeast, and then the secondary facade, which is hidden from public view on the southwest area. Next. And then a panorama just showing this institutional building amongst its 3 residential neighbors on the block. Next. So just to focus on the ground floor enclosure next. So this is you can see on the top left, the image of the original north elevation design, which was built generally as designed. You can see the drum with these dalle de verre windows, which are a type of stained glass window, which is just, it's encased with cement. It's therefore a different type of stained glass window. And then on the upper right, just showing you photos of the existing entry assembly, which is deep within the recess of the building because it was meant to be in the open courtyard. We call that out because those will be taken down and be replaced by our new vestibule that is brought forth to the street, which I will show you in a second. Next. So here it is today with that gated opening, which really covers almost the entire void from sidewalk, the sloping sidewalk, to the underside of the limestone facade with 2 gates. Next. And here are some views from today, which I think show it more as void than it is the presence of the drum. But I think day to night that changes, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Next. And some views looking in the courtyard itself. As Andrew said, this is a very heavily used space, but not a heavily designed space because it's being used in a fairly ad hoc way, perhaps different from the original intention and purity of the design of the building. You can also see notably in photograph 3, the sort of temporary security booth that's being used with folding tables and clipboards in order to try to manage the security needs of the congregation now. And essentially, we were asked to sort of formalize those needs in a way, as Andrew said, was needed for the congregation. Next. We're showing you the first floor plan in its entirety, just so that you get the idea of what the concept is in enclosing these courtyards, because you can see that, of course, the original design is really built around the drum, and the drum being the sanctuary, the heart of the building itself. But that one of the constraints, as you can see with the terrazzo banding that we've shown, the paving pattern on the inside of the building, there is very little circulation space for quite a large assembly space. And so that's been something that Temple Israel has really been struggling with. And they really wanted to capture this courtyard space, not only for the security reasons, but primarily for these programmatic reasons that Andrew mentioned as well. And then you can see the original vestibule, which Steve can point to, is sort of deep within. So those were the doors that I was mentioning before that we would take down. Next. And then our proposal, which is to essentially complete the loop of circulation for clarity of access, egress, and gathering, so that you can circumnavigate the entire sanctuary, and importantly, create this what we call lobby lounge or pre-function space at the front of the building, so that they can actually have life cycle events adjacent to the sanctuary, something that they're not able to do now. And then, of course, add in 2 vestibules, one to the right, which is the entry vestibule for security, and that is our primary entry, and the one to the left, which is a service entry, which will be used by the public or by the congregation of visitors during the peak events, but mostly will be a service entrance for deliveries and such, and also encloses a mechanical closet and a shaft that's needed to bring air down. Next. So then we wanted to focus in, obviously, and show you the existing conditions more closely to the area that we're talking about today, which is 3 inches back from the property line is the non-original gate and fence work. And then I think everything else I've pointed out already from the bigger plans. So then we can go to the proposed, and just to, for a minute, just to tell you about the dimensional considerations of these vestibules, particularly the primary entry vestibule, that we have a 5-inch grade change to navigate going from that part of the sidewalk to the lobby itself. That was dimensional work that was done by the sloped courtyard, which of course we don't have the benefit of to navigate that change. And even more significantly so, where the sidewalk slopes down as you're walking on 75th Street, that we're almost 16 inches below the ground floor by the time we get to the service entry vestibule at left. So we have a two great changes to navigate within these vestibules, which of course set these dimensions, particularly as we don't and can't really navigate having ramps and railings. We wanted to create slopes at the primary entry. So that is something that's setting the depth of this vestibule, as is, of course, the swing of the doors as well, and the presence of magnetometers, which we're going to be installing as well. And 2 in security will be staffing this vestibule as well. So those are the dimensional considerations I wanted to point out as well. And then of course the entry vestibule not only has 3 risers up, but also a non-ADA ramp, which is really just for hand trucks for deliveries as well. We also tried to shape these vestibules in order so that they can navigate the change between the orthogonal sidewalk entrance and then of course the geometry, the radial geometry of the sanctuary itself. So that gives you a sense of the shaping. Next. So here's the existing and proposed elevation. Focusing on the proposed, the idea is a very, very simple, although ballistically rated facade that encloses that courtyard with the 2 entries, double doors at one end and single doors at the other end. We have blanked off some of that facade within the same system, but just using glass that can have an interlayer in it, which we'll zoom in on in a little bit, but that provides both the security and privacy that we need for the security desk that's going to have our closed circuit TV cameras and other security equipment. And then of course on the left side is where the mechanical shaft is as well. So we only blanked off those symmetrically so that the facade is balanced. Next. And then just zooming in so that you can get that, you get a sense of that as well. We are proposing to replace the Temple Israel serifed sign, pin mounted letters with sans serif, but same size letters as well in metal. And then some signage, vinyl graphics on the storefront itself, because despite the size of the signage along the limestone, people sometimes don't know the address and don't know at night that this is actually Temple Israel. So we want to put that at pedestrian level as well. Next. So a section existing and proposed at the property line. So you can see how the limestone comes down in the existing condition. There's about a 21-inch gap, and then there's the existing gate and fence, which is 4 inches back from the property line. And then what we're proposing to do is to push the facade itself, the storefront, the glass glazing is 18 inches. So what we're trying to do is create more of a shadow line so that we can basically acknowledge the sense that this was a void in its original design. So we have a shadow line and we also have a louver, which is a consistent horizontal louver, mostly blanked, but we wanted to keep it consistent along the horizontal length of this entire facade so that it was very simple, quiet. And again, this idea of casting a shadow onto a darker material as well. We have a very small mini LED linear fixture that's tucked into the soffit. And this is only to provide a soft glow at the sidewalk level, just so that people can sort of see their way to the entrance and to give just a little bit of a subtle presence at nighttime as well, without any exposed bulbs or anything to disrupt the neighbors. And I should also say that we're setting this storefront onto a granite base. And the granite base, we will show you a swatch of in a second. And that's really just to have a better wearing surface for salts and other liquids. Next. So zooming in, these are quite large panels. We chose to do panels at this size, even though it was quite a challenge with our ballistic glazing, because we felt that a quiet glazing would be more appropriate and a quiet rhythm that aligns with the joints of the limestone on the first course above this ground floor facade. So it's very quietly, rhythmically aligned with the facade itself. And these are about 9 feet by 6'5" glazing pieces. And you can see on the right through the plan detail that it's only a 2.5-inch wide cap. And the system is relatively narrow for the size of the glazing, which is a 2.5-inch system of glazing. Next. The proposed finishes, the existing limestone, we chose a flamed Picasso granite because it is a dark granite with browner veinings. So we feel it's a good match with the dark oxidized bronze coloring of both the hardware and the mullions and louvers, which will all be a shock coating. The printed interlayer pattern is also a dark bronze color that will be between the ballistic layers. The idea here to have a printed interlayer is just to reflect a little bit of the organic geometry of the drum at the front of the building. So it's just a subtle nod to the organic geometry, and then a very sort of dematerialized Star of David that shows up not in a regular pattern, but occasionally within the pattern, just to recognize the function of Temple Israel. Next. And so here you can see it in full elevation with the original elevation itself. Next. And so here's the existing entry as we showed you before, and then we'll transition now to the renderings. Daytime rendering, which we think really emphasizes the idea of the multi-story limestone blank panel originally conceived of the facade with the floating that sort of floats over the darker void created by the glass, which will naturally be reflective during the daytime, particularly when the lights are lower in the lobby space itself and pre-function space. And then going to the nighttime, which we think will basically sort of emulate what was envisioned, I think, by the architects originally, which is the idea that the drum could be seen despite the heavy shadows, and particularly in the daytime, that we think that the activities at night will allow to highlight the drum in a way that actually has not been highlighted before in this lighting under the courtyard, which was always done really just for security and not in the most pleasant of ways, admittedly, but it was highly functional. And now we have greater control of the lighting there as well. One note before we move on to the window replacement is that we wanted to show in this rendering, you see it, but I want to specifically call out, because it might be an item of discussion, is that there is an intention to have drapes behind the glazing here. And that is because while it is our intention to keep this open for the majority of the time, as Andrew said, we are going to have life cycle events here, birth events, celebrations, funerals, and the like. And Temple Israel would like the opportunity to be able to have that type of privacy so that those life cycle events don't always have to happen in the kind of quote unquote fishbowl of a sidewalk environment. So it's really something functional, and we BVB will be designing those drapes as well, but considered it part of FF&E, but I know that it's a topic that wanted to be raised today. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to very quickly go through the window replacement.
Okay, good afternoon. As Andrew already mentioned, part of this renovation includes window replacement program, which is a significant contributor to our efforts at energy efficiency and compliance with local law 97 in the building. While we're not mandated to comply with the New York City Energy Conservation Code, we have used the prescriptive requirements of that code for glazing systems as our baseline for establishing a specification for these windows. The other thing that we are able to address as part of this renovation is some accessibility upgrades to the building, and you'll see how this all plays into the windows and their design as we go through this presentation. We're looking here again at the original facade or elevation drawing for the 75th Street elevation, and highlighting the areas here on this public facing facade where windows will be replaced as part of the project. And here we can see the existing condition at the moment with some photos showing the windows up at the rotunda. Of course, that window system wraps all the way around to the south side of the building. That will all be replaced the same across around the entire rotunda. And at this, what's called the second floor level, where there's a playground and a roof terrace serving the early childhood learning center there as well. One of the interesting things is that despite being on the street facing facade, because of the setback, these windows overlooking the playground are actually completely hidden from view from the street. But as the photographs show, the rotunda is visible from 75th Street. Here we can see the existing elevation on top, the proposed elevation down below, and the reason that we're here in front of you is that we had endeavored to follow the guidelines to allow this application to be considered at staff level, but there were a couple of things, both to do with the desire for a thermally efficient window with thermally broken framing, and the desire to have the operation of the window comply with ADA regulations, and also have the doors leading out onto the terrace also comply with the widths required for accessibility. We've had to make some reconfigurations. As you can see in the existing, we have painted, which we'll see in the photos in a minute, painted steel framed windows with single glazing. And typically they've got a fixed light at the top, an awning in the middle, and a hopper at the bottom. The issue is that the handle for the awning is too high for accessible operation. So what we're proposing is a fixed light at the top and combining the two lower portions into a single operable awning, but maintaining a framing element here so that the pattern of the framing remains the same. We have widened the doorways ever so slightly. We've endeavored to keep the existing vertical alignment of the mullions with the alignment in the stone jointing up above wherever possible. There's a slight offset at the windows. And then in this particular location here, one of the classrooms did not have an accessible access to the terrace. So we are widening this doorway to opening to add another door so that this classroom behind can have access to. Here's a photograph showing the windows in their existing condition. These are the original windows as installed in the building. And as I mentioned before, it's a painted steel framed system with single pane of glazing. There are instances where it's been modified to allow for AC units. Part of the upgrades, the MEP upgrades we are doing, we can remove all of these window AC units because it will be a centralized air conditioning throughout the building after the renovations are complete. Here we're comparing in elevation and section and plan detail the existing window. This is a typical window bay with what we have proposed, and due to the fact that we need more thermally efficient framing, the thickness of the frame has increased slightly compared to the existing, and so that has resulted in a slight reduction in the extent of glazed area, depending on the width, because the width of each unit varies. That reduction varies from 9.5%, which is within the guidelines. Generally, in some cases, it's more. It's 12% loss of glazed area. We've also endeavored to keep the plane of the windows, the relationship for the plane of the framing to the plane of the masonry wall itself, as consistent or as equal as possible to the existing condition. There are some minor differences purely, again, due to the thickness of the framing, but we've effort to set them back as they currently are. As we move up the building, looking at the rotunda, many of the same issues present themselves. Again, in this case, we have operable bays and then completely fixed bays. We're proposing the same change from a fixed awning and a hopper to a fixed and a combined awning on the lower section of the window, just as we did on the floor below. And here we have the same comparison between the existing condition and the proposed. As it actually happens, we believe that we're actually going to be able to increase the glazed area slightly on the fully fixed window types, but very similar to what we experienced on the second floor below. There will be a slight reduction in the extent of glazed area on the operable window types. In this case, it's down to 6% loss of glazed area for each of the operable ones. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll take public testimony and we may have questions after that. So if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you, and I will turn it over to Sasha Sealy to take us through the testimony.
Alrighty, thank you. So friends of the Upper East Side, you'll be receiving a request from me now. Okay, I see you have accepted my request. Please just turn on your mic and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Laura Varielli representing Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Chair Carroll and Honorable Commissioners. While the Upper East Side is perhaps best known for its tree-lined streets with rows of historic townhouses, it also boasts a number of outstanding modern structures. The architectural diversity of our neighborhood contributes to its significant historic character, and Friends believes strongly in protecting the full spectrum of styles. The notable elements that contribute to a building's character are determined by its architecture. And when it comes to Temple Israel, those elements are the three distinctive volumes that comprise the building. The relationship between the street level void and recessed elliptical drum, the solid limestone facade, and the superior drum is the main aspect of this asymmetrical brutalist building. The existing fencing and ad hoc security solution severely detract from the synagogue's character, and we're pleased to see a proposal to remediate that. Friends believes the applicant has found an ingenious solution that successfully combines significant architectural details and modern-day needs of a growing religious institution. We appreciate the continuity of the proposed curtain wall and entrances and believe its recessed positioning to be in keeping with the building's distinctive volumes. We hope the translucency of the wall will allow for the elliptical drum and its dalle de verre windows to be more legible from the sidewalk. But we can't help to wonder if larger glass panes with less divisions would be more appropriate and achieve a look closer to the building's original intent. While we understand that the now enclosed lobby is an interior space, it is still very much part of the experience of passerbys, and we would have appreciated more details on the raised floor. Friends wishes the applicant has shown the proposed terrazzo floors and how it will relate to the dalle de verre windows. Finally, Friends Preservation Committee takes no issue with the window replacements on the top floors and commend the applicant for taking a sustainable approach while maintaining the general look and feel of the modern style windows. Nonetheless, we wish the applicant's thoughtful approach to this brutalist landmark would have extended a little further and hope this application to also include the replacement of the chain link playground fence. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a glance back over attendees, and I do not see any more hands raised, so there is no one else that wishes to speak. And I will just add for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends approval of this application. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. All right, I'd like to turn to the applicant team and see if you'd like to respond to any of the comments we've heard.
I don't think we do.
Okay, all right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? Okay, so I think we'll move toward our discussion then. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed. And so there are sort of two zones of work that we'll be discussing. One is the replacement of the windows with new high performance windows that will require adjusting the configuration slightly at the, most notably at the lower hopper area, including that in the operable panel, and replacing the fence approved by the commission with a new wall glass glazed assembly that is set back 18 inches from the facade. I will also note that in cases where we have approved enclosing once open vestibules, we retain jurisdiction of the former exterior space, even though it becomes interior. So that's something for you all to just keep in mind as we're discussing this. So let's begin our discussion. Commissioner Oldblum, would you start this one?
Sure. This is a really, really remarkable, cool building that is definitely not contextual, but that gains its charm and interest from its non-contextual design. Therefore, it's important. I think that the base condition, while it was noted that the intention might have been for a kind of transparency between the upper and lower registers of the volume reading through the solid block, that never really was the case, and that it was kind of a gloomy space, could be counted as a defect. And I would not disagree with that assessment. But I think that the nature of the streetscape on this block is characterized by this fissure that is created in the streetscape. It's a purposeful fissure. And the examples that the applicant cited in their appendix all show modernist, iconoclastic, or contextoclastic buildings that purposefully break the street wall in order to create a hierarchical entrance or presence that differentiates the building, which has a different program, from its surroundings. So with that in mind, I take this application very seriously because it's really messing with one of the most essential features of this design. And the standard that we often use, which is to think back on what the architect's intent was and try to perpetuate that to the extent possible. It's very, very hard to accomplish that with this program in mind. That said, I can tell you, as a person who is an architect, who designs synagogues, who deals with security issues every single day, I know whereof they speak, and it's a conundrum. It's a tough spot. But the building that I think of most immediately, in contrast to this, is the Calhoun School that we struggled with at the commission a number of years ago. The project is now complete. I think that it was semi-successful. And I think that the factors that we emphasized there need to be emphasized here more. Number one, transparency. The transparency of the glass has to be the paramount goal. And that has to be translated in a number of ways. Number one, it can be the glass itself. Maybe it should be low iron glass. Obviously, it needs to perform the security function, but perhaps there's a way to do that with a mullionless glass that fits into a channel top and bottom. If that's not possible, maybe it can be a steel system with thinner mullions. Maybe the recess can be increased to increase the degree of the sensation of depth. I think 18 inches for a building that used to have multiple feet at its minimum probably isn't enough, I don't think. Another way that it has to be echoed or emphasized is shown in this rendering, which is lighting. And because the space that is enclosed in the lobby will remain part of the landmark controlled space, I think it's important for us to understand the lighting as an architectural element that is part of how we evaluate it. And we might want to see that a little bit more accurately. We might want to see the ceiling design and think about that as really an outdoor space kind of. I think the last way that I would suggest that they look at it is the vestibules, which seem to me very heavy. The doors are very heavily framed. The partitions are very heavy. And I think that the paramount priority here has to be transparency and an attempt to retain the sense of outdoorness of this space to the greatest degree possible. One last suggestion, a recent renovation over at Park Avenue Synagogue, I think, utilized a large degree of 1 in 20 sloped floor space, which obviated the need, in that case, for a ramp and railings. Such an approach might be doable here, and it would allow for the removal, perhaps, of the stepped curb at the street, which is another inhibitor of that sense of indoor-outdoor flow. I just think that they got to work a little bit harder to get this to retain the feel of the original.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devonshire?
Michael has said it very eloquently, and I wouldn't have anything to add to that. I do think the issue with the windows in the rotunda it's fine, the solution.
Okay, great. Commissioner Jefferson?
I agree with what Michael said. I think the other issue here is the curtains. I mean, I mean, this is such a public view that when you put the curtains up, symbolically it means something. And I'm wondering if they could use a new technology of kind of blackout screens or black out the glass, and, you know, darken the glass in somehow so that it didn't have a curtain, because curtain, the symbol of a curtain, it's heavy with symbolism, and maybe there's another way of creating privacy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
I have nothing to add to the on-point comments made by Commissioner Goldblum and Commissioner Jefferson.
All right, and Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin, you're muted if you didn't realize.
Yes, I agree with the, comments that have been made so far about trying to figure out a way to get transparency while preserving security, and the views of the Dal de Ver sanctuary windows, which are so much a part of the streetscape right now. So I'd like to see them try some other alternatives to achieve that.
Okay. All right. So thank you all. And thank you for the very thorough and detailed presentation. So I think, I think we're unanimously supportive of the window replacement, and I think conceptually supportive of the approach at the ground floor and the idea of enclosing the space, but would like to ask you to explore ways to make that assembly as transparent as possible, following some of the suggestions that we've heard, thinking about thinner mullions or mullionless glass, eliminating curves, or thinking about how those partitions intersect for the vestibules intersect the assembly. So I think we'd like to have you come back one more time with that, and to show us some of that further exploration of the ground floor assembly. We'll have you back as soon as you're ready.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. All right, so that concludes our day today. Thank you everyone for your participation, and thank you commissioners for your hard work as always, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care.